Welcome, everyone. We're going to get going now. It's already noon, so welcome to today's webinar. It's e-bikes, harnessing their power to get more people biking. And very excited to have everybody here. My name is Lisa Slakoff. I'm a longtime Hub member, and let's not get into how long. Vancouver cyclist and an active volunteer with the Vancouver UBC local committee, and I've worked on a number of different Hub programs. So this webinar is organized by Hub Cycling and its card-carrying members. Hub Cycling is a not-for-profit charitable organization, and our mission is to get more people cycling more often. We can accomplish this goal through advocacy, education, events, and research, all of which we do. And you can find out more information about our work, membership, courses, and events at bikehub.ca. I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge that we are webcasting live from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. A special thank you to our members for making this programming possible. If you'd like to join Hub, please visit bikehub.ca/join. And just before we get going, just a few little housekeeping rules. As you listen to the presentation, please use the chat function to ask your questions. The chat function down at the bottom of Zoom, as most of us have figured out by now. We'll give our speakers time at the end of the webinar to answer as many questions as possible. There's quite a lot of us on here, but we'll try to find the most common questions, the most urgent questions, and bring them forward. So hopefully all questions will be answered. Moderators are standing by. They'll remove anyone who is being disruptive to the webinar. And a reminder that the meeting and all chat messages will be recorded. So please don't record the meeting yourself. Don't share sensitive or personal information in the chat. And we will share the presentation with you all in an email toward the end of the week. We have a great presentation for you today. We're so privileged to have three great panelists, Todd Litman, Zachary Mathurin, and Lisa Corriveau. So Todd Litman is the founder and executive director of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute and an author, very exciting, of the newly published book, New Mobilities, Smart Planning for Emerging Transportation Technologies. Zachary Mathurin is a North Shore Mobility Options Coordinator for the District of North Van, and an urban planner who's been working on the rollout of the Lime e-bike share on the North Shore. Lisa Corriveau is a family and cargo bike cycling advocate. She runs the popular biking blog Spokesmama, which is fabulous, and is a proponent of e-bikes for families and people with mobility issues. So let's get started with Todd, who'll give us a more macro view of the benefits e-bikes can bring to communities. Then we'll move on to Zachary, who will speak to his experience of bringing an e-bike share into a Metro Van municipality. And we'll end the discussion with Lisa, who will share her experiences on how e-bikes have shifted the way she and her family travel. So take it away, Todd.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and greetings from Victoria, British Columbia. I'm going to go through my slideshow a little bit quick. And so hopefully we can cover any questions that you have in the discussion at the end. And I will add, I will post my presentation. I will send a link in the chat box in a minute that will, so you can access my slideshow. Okay, so we're going to talk about why and how to encourage e-bikes. And my presentation is based on some of the research I did for my book, New Mobilities. And it just so happens Island Press, my publisher, has a 50% discount this week. So if what I present piques your interest, buy my book. Okay, so e-bikes are a category of what we could call micro modes, which are small powered modes, everything from powered wheelchairs and scooters to e-bikes and electric cargo bikes. And some of the implications, if we do want to support active and micro modes, we need the facilities, good bicycle facilities, and we want to encourage things like bike sharing, and so I'll talk about some of the how later. But first, let's mention that there are a diverse range of benefits that result when people drive less and rely more on walking, bicycling, micro modes, and public transportation. So there are categories of these benefits. The way I break it down, there's some benefits when we improve your walking, biking, and micro mode conditions. Others when people use these modes more. Another set of benefits when that leverages reductions in automobile travel. And another set of benefits that result if by reducing car travel and the infrastructure, the size of roads and the amount of parking, we create more compact multimodal communities. I don't have time to go into the details of this, but what we can say very briefly is active and micro modes provide lots of benefits, lots of potential benefits. Now, let me take a side trip and mention that we're discussing this in the context of many jurisdictions having emission reduction and VMT reduction targets. And so Vancouver has targets to reduce emissions and reduce vehicle travel by 20% and increase walking and bicycling over the next 2 decades. And British Columbia similarly has targets. So we can say that micro modes help achieve these targets, our local and regional targets. Especially when you frame it in terms of climate action, emission reductions. An important point is that most emission reduction plans right now, they focus primarily on vehicle electrification. My recent research indicates that electrification really is not going to be adequate to achieve ambitious emission reduction targets. Vehicle travel reductions are equally or greater importance, especially during the next decade or two. And so micro modes, e-bikes can play a very important role in achieving these targets. Let's put this into perspective. This map here shows Central Surrey, a typical suburban city outside of Vancouver. And if you were to arrive in Central Surrey, say by SkyTrain, in 15 minutes, you can only reach about 4 square kilometers or 3 square kilometers of area. If you have a bicycle that goes 12 kilometers an hour, you can reach 30 square kilometers. But if you have an e-bike that can go, say, 22 kilometers an hour, you can reach about 100 square kilometers or most of the city. So e-bikes have tremendous potential to expand the people's ability to reduce their rely on active modes or micro modes and reduce car travel. Many studies, and I'll at the end of the slideshow, I'll show you a bibliography of them. Major studies indicate that improving bicycling and e-bike conditions can increase urban bicycle mode share from the current, let's say, 5 to 10% to about double or triple that. It can increase transit ridership by improving access to stops and stations. A Dutch study found that e-bike purchasers significantly increased their bicycling. They about tripled or quadrupled the amount that they rely on bicycling, and it reduced their car travel about 10%. Other studies look at the cost-benefit analysis and conclude that improving bicycling can provide a very high return on investment. $1 spent to improve bicycle facilities, bike lanes, and paths can provide many, many dollars worth of benefits. Bicycling, walking, bicycling, micromodes, and public transit are far more affordable than automobile travel. We're not talking just a little bit of savings. We're talking an order of magnitude savings. I can attest from personal experience. Our family's been car-free for the last decade, that it's easy to get by car-free. If you live car-free, it's easy to spend less than $1,000 a year on local travel, compared with $5,000 to $10,000 a year that you have to spend if you own a car, including an electric car. There's an interesting way to look at it, where we ask, not only when we evaluate travel speeds, not only based on the time you spend traveling, but also the time people have to spend working to earn money for their travel. And when you use this, we call it effective speed. The effective speed of driving actually often turns out to be slower than walking and bicycling in public transit, especially for low-income people. So effective speed recognizes that, particularly if you want to get by spending less money, you want to focus on the affordable modes. Public costs are also far, far lower for people who travel by walking and bicycling and public transit than people who rely on driving. Every time somebody purchases a vehicle, a car, they expect governments to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a year for roads to accommodate that car, and businesses to spend thousands of dollars a year to provide parking, off-street parking for those cars, which is ultimately unfair to people who drive less than average. Many of our current policies are biased in favor of automobile travel. We say they lead to automobile dependency and sprawl. Things like the way we spend our transportation dollars, and minimum parking requirements and zoning codes, and the way we design streets to favor faster traffic to the detriment of slower modes. So we need to reverse that. We need to understand the value of multimodalism. We're not suggesting that everybody has to give up driving altogether, but an efficient and equitable transportation system ensures that anybody who wants can get around by walking, bicycling, and micromodes for local errands, and high quality public transit for when they're traveling from one neighborhood to another, and only needs to use their car when it's really cost effective. You can think of this as just purely fairness, that if somebody owns a car, it's understandable that they want the minimum parking requirements and lots of money spent on highways. But those of us that rely primarily on walking, bicycling, and public transit want our transportation resources invested in our modes. So there are a number of ways to achieve this multimodal transportation system. I'm not going to go into the details. It includes improving walking, bicycling, and public transit services, but it also includes incentives. We have to discourage people from driving as much, reward people for using the most efficient mode for each trip, and we need to create compact multimodal communities where it's really easy to get around. One component of this is what we call complete streets. This is how transportation planners and engineers think about a lot of these issues. Transportation professionals, they don't necessarily focus on one mode at a time. They focus on a facility, a road, or a block, or a new development. And they ask, how can we ensure, and complete streets planning asks, how can we ensure that we're accommodating all modes and not favoring automobile travel? Another perspective, another way to think of this that's gaining a lot of traction these days is what we call 15-minute neighborhood planning. It's also called new urbanism, smart growth, location efficiency. It all refers to creating communities where it's easy to get around without driving, that most of the services and activities that you need are accessible with a short walk or a quick bike ride, or now with e-bike, micro mode. If you're interested in affordability, this is particularly important. We need to create communities where anybody, particularly people with low incomes, can find affordable housing, appropriate housing in walkable and transit-friendly neighborhoods where it's easy to live car-free, because owning a car is a huge component of your total household transportation costs. Now, the challenge that we face is that most of the attractive walkable neighborhoods actually forbid the lowest cost housing types. That is, things like an apartment where the parking is unbundled. So you're no longer forced to pay for expensive parking facilities if you don't own a car, and or car-free townhouses. Most urban neighborhoods make it very difficult or impossible to build those lower priced type of housing. So part of encouraging e-bikes is to make sure that people who are amenable to the affordable forms of transportation can find the housing that they need in those neighborhoods. Now, there's some good news, and that is, particularly for those of you who reside in the Vancouver area, that Vancouver is a world leader in planning these types of policy, or implementing these types of policies. Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan is really a model for other communities around the world. So you can help achieve these wonderful benefits by supporting and promoting Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan, or making sure that your community, if you live outside of Vancouver, is developing similar plans, and to make sure that those are not that those plans can overcome the inevitable opposition that occurs. Now, there is a lot of research on this, and right here I've linked to, or I've identified some of the key studies that I've used to think about and quantify the benefits of improving walking and bicycling, public transit, and micro modes. And if you want more information, visit our website, vtpi.org, and you'll find many reports that go into quite a bit of detail about this. And let me now add to the chat box my link to my slideshow. And that's it for me. Lisa? Or Zachary? Zachary, you're muted.
Thank you. I think I take it from here. Thank you so much, Todd, for the presentation. Really great way to get us started, and super relevant to what I'll be following up on, which is one of those policies, projects that help, hopefully help to encourage that transition to some of the more sustainable modes, and that is bike share. Now, if I can just move the toolbar, I'll be able to launch the end of the slideshow. Are my slides visible? I'll assume that if the chat is not blowing up with no, that they are visible. Perfect. Thank you so much. So my name is Zach. I'm the North Shore Mobility Options Coordinator. I work on behalf of all three North Shore communities. So that's the City and District of North Vancouver and the District of West Vancouver. And we've been collaborating for a few years now on efforts to bring bike share to the Metro Vancouver region, to the North Shore. And so I'll be talking about a bit of the process that we undertook to get bike share launched here, talk about some of the early observations and experience we've had since launching this summer, and then obviously respond to questions at the end of Lisa's presentation, who will follow me. So, how did we get bike share onto the North Shore? What are the steps we took to get here? So the purpose of bike share, it's important to remember that we're doing this as a pilot. So this is an opportunity for us to learn, to test the waters for this kind of service. And it's really to expand that range of options that's available to people who are making decisions about how they get around for commuting, for recreation, for utilitarian trips like going to the restaurant or meeting friends. We also want to understand demand for these kinds of services on the North Shore and their potential for shifting certain types of trips, particularly short trips that are happening within the community from the city to the district or within one of the municipalities. It's also an opportunity to explore how municipalities and different agencies can come together and regionally coordinate and manage an approach, a regulatory model to manage and have a relationship with providers of these services. This is an industry that's dominated by the private sector. And so it's often a public and private relationship that occurs. And we're three communities working together to manage and make that happen. So we are working, we are monitoring and looking at what it takes for us to do that collaboratively to hopefully stand as a model for other regions that might be looking to do similar things. And finally, bike share is, it's a relative but in terms of all of these micro modes that Todd was talking about, it's getting to be a little older. Different form factors have been emerging in recent years. E-scooters, electric mopeds, one wheels, other devices are emerging in the world. And so this is an opportunity for us to get a feel for what shared mobility looks like for something that's well known and understood before we start looking at some of these other modes that are emerging and are making their way to our streets. This project began in late 2018, early 2019. It's the result of a recommendation from the Integrated North Shore Transportation Planning Project, which was initiated by the three communities, the two First Nations on the North Shore, as well as the provincial government, to examine the transportation challenges on the North Shore, given its unique position within Metro Vancouver region. And one of those recommendations, which was a short-term win, was developing a bike share framework. And what the three municipalities initially worked on in 2019 was a request for proposal seeking a single operator to pilot bike share on the North Shore. It was always going to be e-bikes and bike share because of the hills, because of the challenging topography and community members that we have. The feedback was if this is going to get uptake, it's going to be electric. And we did our best in 2019. Unfortunately, that RFP ran into some challenges that prevented us from moving forward with any of the bids, but we were still committed to bike share. And so we went back to the drawing board to think about a more flexible approach that could be responsive to the industry as it evolved, because it is a fast changing industry, but also allow us to react to the reality of what that looks like on the ground once it's here. And so what we developed instead was a permitting process in 2020 that would allow the bike share program operators to apply for a street permit the same way many other businesses and street users use a street permit to access our streets and deploy their e-bikes in a careful way. And so once the City of North Vancouver and the District of North Vancouver began that process at the council level, we launched applications. The District of West Vancouver later joined, and we were able to select Lime as our preferred operator this past spring and worked with them in the beginning of the summer to launch a couple of months ago in July. So what does the North Shore approach look like? What we started with was our guiding principles, a policy designed to outline what our expectations are, what our goals, and what are we really hoping to get out and monitor over the course of the 2 years of this pilot. So that was adopted by council, and it's really supported and enabled by bylaw amendments that created the new permit in our street and traffic bylaw, some regulations about how e-bikes can be managed and used, as well as our bylaw notice enforcement bylaw for managing the more punitive and penalties for not respecting permit requirements or behavioral requirements of other aspects of the program. And these are supported by guidelines that really outline what our expectations are. And so these guidelines cover everything from safety to monitoring, data sharing, several topics. I'll touch on a few here given the time. So safety wise, obviously we want the bike to be adequate for our conditions, our weather. As you've seen today, it was wet. So we wanted to make sure that the bike was suitable for year-round use, and that riders of varying backgrounds, experience, ages, abilities, had and comfort level with cycling would be able to use this pretty much with no prior experience. You know, you're walking up to a bike and you're unlocking it to take for a ride. So it has to be pretty intuitive. We wanted to make sure that it was available to as many people as possible. So that meant making sure that our various neighborhoods got coverage. Again, as I said, year-round availability, minimum number of e-bikes so that there would always be one available if you need it. And what we really also focused on is the operations and parking aspect. The operator is responsible for all aspects of the program, but we do work with them to plan the parking. So our expectation is that bikes get returned to designated parking locations across the North Shore. And so we've been working with Lime to establish those locations to improve communications and get the word out that folks, you know, at the end of their trip should return this to maintain a clear public road that aren't blocked. Other users can still access other parts of the road, the sidewalks. And it helps with managing operations as well, reducing emissions from driving around, rebalancing e-bikes that are left astray. So this is an example of what we mean by these designated parking locations. The two images are in the city. One's at City Hall in central Lonsdale and the other is in Moodyville. So these are known as groves per Lime's branding, and they're simple. They're tactical urbanism in a way where we just install some pavement tape. There are delineators for the ones that go on street, and Lime is installing, weather permitting, some stencils to increase that visibility to let people know that this is where the bikes go. One thing to note is that while municipalities approve the designs and the locations, ultimately Lime is responsible for all of the aspects of installation and the costs associated with doing so. Originally, we launched in just the city of North Vancouver and the district of North Vancouver with about 30 groves spread across our key town centers. But we have seen with ridership and demand in various areas that was not enough. And so we have worked with Lime to identify new locations and are really excited to see that dozens of new ones will be deployed in the coming weeks. It is sort of the quiet season. So we're hoping that with better parking, people will have the time to adjust ahead of next year's sort of return to active cycling with the better weather. So what we've seen so far, I'll share a few of the data we've been able to collect. I can't share everything yet. We're still working through what can be publicly shared, but I can share some information. So since late July, when the project launched, over 12,000 trips have been taken by about 6,000 people, or around 200 trips and 200 users a day. That's 2,500 kilometers traveled so far with a median trip of just under 2 kilometers or 10 minutes, which is really telling us that this is supporting the short trips that we were targeting. And Lime, all of this information is through a Lime dashboard. We get information daily, and that dashboard also provides us with an estimate of CO2 savings, assuming that those bike trips replace a car trip. And so far, we've saved approximately 6,100 kilograms of CO2 with those 12,000 trips. So really encouraging numbers so far. Some really good trends that were already emerging in the late summer. So this is showing you some of the ridership figures, the number of trips we were seeing daily from launch in July. And up until a week ago, so if you see at the end there with the rain on most days, the pattern was steady increase of ridership and trips within a week. So Mondays generally have that lower trip figure, and over the course of the week that ramps up with those peaks happening on the weekend, which tells us that users were taking advantage of the good weather and their time off this summer. And as to be expected, the rain causes ridership to plummet. But this was a very encouraging sign, given when we launched, how many bikes were launched, and the weather and conditions out there. So the riders themselves. So again, fewer riders at the beginning of the week, slowly ramping up over the course of each week, peaking over the weekend and coming down quite drastically whenever a sunny day is followed by a rainy day, such as the 25th to 26th of September, just last week, if you'll recall. So really predictable pattern, but really encouraging to see that ridership was pretty strong and consistent through the summer. So people found these bikes and used them. What we've also been looking at is where these bikes are traveling. We do have access to anonymized trip data for GPS locations, so we can see routes of where people go. And what we're finding is that despite having designated corridors for cycling in the North Shore and specific cycle pathways, people are using this on every street in the city and in many streets in the district, and they're going up and down. North-south is the hilly direction, as well as east to west, which is generally flat along those streets. So really encouraging signs to see so much use and such intensity in the core parts of our community, and some really key corridors seeing the usage that they are, sort of justifying the investments we've been making over the last few years in the 3 municipalities. But that hasn't been without its problems. We have noticed, obviously, some challenges with parking particularly. And what we found is that bikes are going to places we didn't expect, where Lime didn't expect, where we did not expect there to be a ton of demand and a ton of ridership. So obviously, we don't have quite enough parking groves to support all of that demand. There's also been uneven rider education. And that is due to just the working to roll out, working with Lime, getting the messaging across that we needed to, that gets people to comply. And that's where we get to the balance of incentives and penalties. We've been really favoring incentives to educate and encourage people to respect the rules and bring their bikes back to the designated locations. But penalties always remain an option. And once this sort of season tapers off and we have a chance to efforts have panned out. We have also been receiving quite a bit of feedback about the program since it launched. Generally speaking, there has been a high level of community support, quite a few positive feedback, people who want to use the service, but they do see some areas that need improvement, mainly relating to the parking. And those complaints are really 2 main issues are either bikes that are blocking the way of other users in a way that's not acceptable. And so in those situations, we immediately flag Lime when we get it, and Lime responds when they get it immediately as well, to pick up the bike and relocate it. And that was initially a problem. I think with time, some of the efforts Lime has been making have reached people, and we've seen a steady decrease in complaints related to parking. But it has confirmed for us that we definitely want to do more robust engagement. And so we are planning for some more perception surveys, some surveys through the Lime app, as well as through our own municipal channels, to get a better idea of how people who are using the service and not using the service perceive and have experienced the launch here on the North Shore. So what we're looking to do next over the winter, ahead of next spring, and what we anticipate to be a more robust and re-rollout of the bike share program, from our learnings this year, and it's rolling out additional groves as soon as possible. And that's what we're doing this fall, improving the rider education aspect of pushing out messaging, but also doing some in-person opportunities as well. The municipalities will begin to do regular parking audits to make sure that people are complying and working with Lime on key areas that we identify as being issues, and obviously continue monitoring every other aspect of the program that we are looking at. The complaints we get, the ridership numbers, everything, and reporting that out to councils and the public. So that concludes what I have to share, and I will be passing it along to Lisa Corriveau, who will be sharing how her personal experiences on the e-bike have changed her life.
Okay, thanks, Zachary. That was great. It's interesting to hear the details of what's going on with the Lime bikes on the North Shore. Okay, so let's do a screen share. Okay, I think that's working. Whoops. All right. So I'm going to be talking about how e-biking changes things for my family, how it intersects with family biking and disability, because they're both very mixed up for me. I'm also going to turn off my, oops, hang on one second, where am I? Should be right. Turn off my camera here, just one second. Okay, all right, let's go back again. So I'm not necessarily your typical person just getting into e-biking. I've been riding, I started bike commuting in university, which was in the late 90s, mostly to my part-time job. I was at SFU, so I didn't ride up to Burnaby Mountain that often, although I really could have used an e-bike for that commute. But I started to see how many things I could do with my bike when I started riding more often, commuting to work, socializing, getting groceries, other kinds of shopping, and even small bike tours locally. And as a broke student, it was great to be able to get around, even cheaper than transit. I joined Moto a few years after that. So I was, a member of the car sharing co-op, it used to be called then. And I used it for occasional trips out of town, hiking trips, visiting families in other cities around Metro Vancouver. Big shopping trips. We actually were Costco members back then. Having car sharing as an option meant that I didn't need to buy a car. So without a vehicle sitting in my driveway waiting for me, my bike became the default for getting around. So I did use transit and walking a little bit as well. But once we had children in 2010 and 2013, we continued living car free. We had them on the bike when they were 7 and 9 months old. So we went through a number of different iterations of family biking over the years. We started with a trailer, we got a front seat. 2014, we bought our first cargo bike. This one's still acoustic. So I was hauling the kids around under my own power entirely. We found another Dutch buckfiets a couple years after that. And unfortunately, around 2013, I started having a lot of issues with pain when I was walking and standing. It took a couple of years, but I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis in my hip in 2015. This meant I had to give up a lot of activities, physical activities that I really loved, like hiking. I used to be a professional stilt walker, can't do that anymore. Even just going for long walks. But biking, I can still do, thankfully. So as my kids got bigger, hauling them around with the cargo bike, while it wasn't, particularly painful, it got pretty tiring because, they just keep growing and eating. So I started looking into electric assist, and I bought my first electric cargo bike in 2019. So there it is. At the store there, I biked there with my Brompton and then biked home carrying my Brompton on the e-bike. Since I started riding electric assist, I have to say it hasn't changed my riding habits a huge amount because I was already riding 5 to 7 days a week. The changes are a little more subtle. Like I'll be more likely to take a quieter or a longer or a hillier route. So I might enjoy my ride because the hills are actually no big deal with the motor helping me. I don't really blink at riding 15 kilometers, going over to the North Shore, for example, or out to Steveston, because I know I won't be exhausted when I get home. It's changed my shopping habits a little bit though. We still are Costco members and I probably buy more stuff at once because I'm not worried about getting up that hill on the way home, which has been, having that capacity has kind of been amazing during the pandemic so that I can shop less often, when we're trying to minimize time spent indoors with other people. So there's a couple of my epic Costco hauls in the past month or 2 or 3. I do not go shopping all the time though. Most of the time our rides are just going to school. So it's really easy for me to get my kids to school in the e-cargo bike. It actually takes less time than driving. It's about 1 or 2 minutes faster. And then even more if you factor in the time finding parking for a car or going to pick up a car share vehicle as well. The other thing that I really love about having an e-cargo bike is being able to carry my kids and their bikes. So they are both able to ride bikes independently, although one of them is autistic and he doesn't always want to ride or he gets overwhelmed and needs to stop riding when we're on the way places. So having a bike that's capable of carrying my kids as well as towing one of their bikes makes biking everywhere possible for us. So in case you're wondering, this is called a bag and drag in family biking circles. You can also do it with a full-size adult bike. So that's how we take our regular bikes to the shop quite often. Because of the ease of riding longer distances, the speed that I can get there, my ability to haul big loads more easily. I do drive a little bit less than I did before, which is a bit funny because I'm actually a moto blogger ambassador and I use moto cars less in the past 2 years. But yeah, mainly the thing that having an e-bike has enabled for me is just maintaining what I was doing before. So, going on rides with the family, going bike camping, the North Shore cargo bike ride, we biked over there, which was, I think, 16 or 18 kilometers. And then we went on a longer ride around the North Shore and then biked home again. So it was a 50-kilometer day, but that's not a huge thing when I have a motor that I can, increase the assist and use it as needed. Being able to do something active, getting exercise, keeping my joints moving really helps my physical health. As well as mental health. This is something I hear from a lot of people that getting the exercise just really helps them feel better in so many ways. It's so hard to fit in self-care like going to the gym or fitness classes, even if you want to go inside these days, but particularly when you've got kids. So finding activities you can do with a disability like me is also difficult. So having low impact exercise just built into the day by e-bike riding is really gold. So that's my story, but it's not just my story. 7 years ago when we started cargo biking, we kind of felt like weirdos. We knew every other cargo bike that we'd see around the city, but nowadays it's not at all unique. The availability of electric cargo bikes, and by cargo bikes, I'm talking about the ones that are relatively small and just carry kids or groceries, not the gigantic ones that Todd was showing pictures of. But yeah, the availability of them is making a lot more families consider biking for transportation. It's just so much less daunting to carry a couple of kids or more when you have a few hundred extra watts. So a lot of families are getting cargo bikes these days, in my anecdotal experience. There's over a dozen at my kids' school alone who use e-bikes to get around. Most of them are e-cargos, but not all. I've got dozens of friends and acquaintances as well who are in the same boat. They are disabled or their children are, or both. And e-biking, particularly e-cargo bikes, are a big part of their lives to get around or also for recreation. So I mean, if you're looking at Europe and Germany and the Netherlands specifically, e-bikes are pretty huge. In 2018, it was 55% of all adult bikes in the Netherlands were electric assist. 2019, 25% of all bikes bought in Germany were electric. So they're definitely getting into it. I don't think it's any coincidence that these two countries are also really safe places to ride in general, because of all the years of infrastructure and other pro cycling improvements there. So we could be there too with more and better investment in safe cycling routes and also secure bike parking. So these are a few of my friends. Both of them actually are in Seattle. Hub actually did a great webinar in June about adaptive cycling. I don't know if any of you were there for that. It's on the website if you want to hear it. I think that's what most people imagine when you talk about disabled cycling, you know, hand cycles and trikes. But of the roughly 1/4 of Canada's population who are disabled, more than 90% of us are not wheelchair users, and many of us can and do use regular styles of bikes. So we're kind of invisible in our disabilities. I have a lot of friends who also use e-bikes with their kids, and many of them or their kids are disabled. So they use these bikes actually as a car replacement. It's not just for recreation. Many of them were able to give up a vehicle because of their e-bike. They started to use the bike to do a lot more things like grocery shopping and regular commuting. So yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of them are Seattle, which is a lot hillier than Vancouver. So the electric assist enables them to navigate all the terrain with their kids and their cargo. Another thing that I don't know if it's very commonly understood, but many of us actually find it easier to transport our kids by bike than by car. I know people sort of think of cycling as like, oh, it's great for the environment, but you know, what a hassle. My daughter, for example, gets car sick really, really easily. Just, you know, driving down Kingsway at 40 or 50 kilometers per hour, yeah. But on a bike, she doesn't have any issues with motion sickness at all. Another friend of mine, Shirley, finds it a lot easier and more relaxing to transport her kiddo by bike. He's autistic. He prefers the bike, but also if he needs her, it's a lot easier to stop and tend to him along the way than with him in the back of a car, having to find a place to pull over and get out and all of the stuff. So the other thing that is great about having an e-bike is, you know, the kids that we're carrying around aren't necessarily that small. Lurlene's kids on the left of this picture here, those are pretty little. That's what people think of when people are talking about cargo biking with little kids, I guess. But, you know, mine are, you know, 8 and 11, and I don't see myself stopping riding with them all that soon. Some kids, you know, they can ride like mine, but there are also other kids who are not going to learn how to ride a bike. So I have friends with, you know, autistic kids or kids with Down syndrome and other disabilities who, you know, if they're going somewhere by bike, their parents going to be carrying them. And even if your kids can ride, they're going to be slow. So, you know, just getting them there efficiently to school on an e-cargo bike is it's just so much faster. It's the same reason that many parents drive their kids to school instead of walking, right? You know, you got not that much time in the morning. So yeah, I have a lot of friends, so many friends all over the place who have different reasons for e-biking. One of my friends has cancer, and using an e-bike allows her to get exercise and fresh air without exhausting herself. So she can, you know, pump up the assist if she doesn't have the energy. Another friend of mine has a really long commute, and she works at very strange hours. So she's commuting at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she feels a little safer on an e-bike because she can get there quickly and doesn't get too tired by the time she gets to work. So she's gone from taking transit or driving to biking 5 days a week. Another friend of mine, you know, she's not disabled, but she has 4 children. So, you know, she really needs the electric assist to carry them around. And she does, all on one cargo bike. So yeah, or people like Corey, who's in the picture on the right. She's had a number of injuries and she has a degenerative disc disease. So e-biking has made it possible for her to get exercise during COVID when she didn't have access to physical therapy or swimming or social walks. but it's also replacing a lot of her car trips as well. And she's gotten into bike camping too. So yeah, I think the kind of retiree gets e-bike to cruise around the seawall stereotype is what a lot of people think of when they imagine a person with an e-bike, but e-bikes have so much potential for families and for younger disabled people, especially for transportation, not only recreation. So I look forward to the day when we have e-bike rebates and grants to enable more people to get around by e-bike other than cars, particularly for disabled people, because in particular, disabled people are more likely to be low income and struggle to afford an e-bike or particularly a adaptive cycle. Safer cycling routes we've talked about, obviously that's key, but the lack of secure bike parking is one of the biggest barriers that I hear when it comes to investing in an e-bike. I mean, why would you spend $2,000 or $5,000 or even $15,000 on a bike that can get stolen at any minute? So cities really need to get on this with street blocking, bike corrals, and making it easier to convert car parking spaces in multifamily buildings into bike rooms. So I could talk about cargo bikes all day. If you're interested in continuing the conversation or following my overly large bike to shop exploits and more on family cycling, I spend entirely too much time on social media at these places. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and to our other fabulous presenters. I love the way this moved from the macro, Todd giving us sort of a real overview of some of the policies and so on, right to municipal and right to very personal. It was wonderful. Certainly lots of lessons for policymakers and for cycling advocates in this call to carry forward their quest for more biking in whatever form we can use across the Lower Mainland and beyond. So we do have quite a few questions. So just a reminder for our wonderful panelists to try to keep your answers succinct so we can get a bunch of these in. Let's get started. A question early on, what do we think it will take for municipalities to revamp their current transportation plans toward active transportation, e-bikes, and e-cargo bikes, which is a whole other important area. And maybe I'll just start with you, Zach, at the municipal level, and Todd and Lisa, if there's something you would like to throw in, just maybe just raise your hands when Zach's finished. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, I think that from my knowledge, working for 3 communities here on the North Shore, there are plans underway and there's work underway already for those kinds of strategies. The City of North Vancouver is working on a mobility strategy right now that's gone through some public feedback already that will cover in part electric mobility. And I've seen other municipalities in this region starting to look at that as well. I won't point to them to put them on the spot, but outside of Vancouver, there is a lot of work happening around here. So I think it's already happening. We'll close with, which is, I think these cities need to do more to promote that they're working on this, because obviously it's important to folks and it is a winning issue. So we should be elevating it as much as we can.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Zach. A great idea about more promotion on that so people aren't left kind of in the dark. Talking about creating sustainable mobility plans, sustainable logistics plans to encourage e-bikes and e-cargo bikes for businesses, creating micro hubs for good movements and so on, leading to a lot of the benefits that Todd's talking about. Oh, sorry, that is the one that we just did. And I did want to mention there was a question about achieving ambitious emissions reductions with electric cars alone. Todd did respond to that and suggest that people, and he provided a link to his report, Comprehensive Transportation Emission Reduction Planning, because it is very important to account for embodied emissions. So that'll probably come out in the email that comes out later this week as well. There was a question I'm quite interested in as a local advocate. E-scooters and e-wheels seem even more practical for buildings that now prohibit bikes on elevators. Why own an e-bike? So perhaps any of you who have a thought on that would be great.
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, some of those new devices that are coming out are of questionable legal status still in BC. So I think that there are still challenges of catching up at the provincial level to legalize, monitor, figure out what the regulatory process is. And so I think there's still reticence in the market of people buying it or allowing that in these common areas that aren't suitable for e-bikes. So the one wheel, for instance, is one of those examples where they're not legal yet, but I think that their emergence is obviously pushing us towards thinking about regulatory framework.
Thanks, Zachary. Also wondering about, this is for you, Lisa, a more personal question, but perhaps there's also more macro answers. What insurance do you have for your e-bikes? How do you keep it from getting stolen? I've heard a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, this is constant conversation in all of the family biking group that I'm in and everywhere else. I have my bikes covered under our house insurance. I know there are some companies that do like just bike insurance alone. It is a little tricky because sometimes if you say, oh yeah, I'll just, have my bikes covered under the home insurance, either tenant or homeowner, they have a maximum of what they'll cover. So if you have a higher end e-bike, they won't actually pay for it if it's stolen, but yeah, you got to check the details. And then just to prevent theft, all the locks. I will use 5 locks if I'm locking up somewhere out of sight in a area that I think is higher theft. If I'm near my bike in a park or something, I'll just maybe lock the front wheel. So it varies depending on the situation, but yeah, just making my bike look really hard to steal is my main tactic.
Okay, thanks very much, Lisa. Zachary, a few questions about the North Shore pilot. Any idea of trip purposes, given that most trips are occurring on weekends, the assumption being maybe a lot of the trips are for recreational purposes? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that our assumption right now is a bit of this is a new thing. So people are coming out and taking advantage of the good weather to try out a new mode. It's a shiny feature, right? So that might be what we've been seeing in the summer. But I think exposure is still a good use for this system. And we don't have information right now that tells us why people are using Lime. That is something that we're working on to push out both the internal in-app kind of surveys that can ask people those questions, but also being out in the field and just flagging people down. It's just challenging with COVID and the current situation of where is the right level of interaction and engagement. But it is in the card.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think there's also a question here for Lisa. Has anyone got any data on the difference for e-bike and e-cargos make to the proportion of women and children traveling by bikes? And that might be something for Todd or Zachary as well.
Yeah, I don't know of any stats. I mean, anecdotally, I know I see a lot more women on bikes, especially e-cargo bikes, because typically women are the ones who are worried about being able to balance the bike, being able to carry their kids up the hills. and they're typically smaller as well. So yeah, it's having an electric bike, and a lot of the newer models like mine, you can see in the background maybe, which are kind of a smaller form factor with a lower center of gravity. And this bike is designed for women, essentially. Having those around makes a huge difference to more female riders, I'm sure. But I don't know any stats.
Yeah, I approach this a little differently. I'm not thinking about the bikes as the facilities. And what we do know is that protected bicycle facilities attract a much broader range of users than the older facilities that basically a bike lane where bicyclists were expected to have the skills of being able to ride adjacent to high-speed traffic. So I think you could frame a social equity justification or one of the reasons that we need to use it to approach these issues from a comprehensive perspective, looking at the facilities and land use development patterns and things like parking policies to all fit together to support our goal to make sure that anybody, and particularly people with low incomes or disabilities or children, are able to take advantage of these benefits. This, I think it's a mistake, or let's say, I think we undersell active and micro modes when we focus on environmental benefits, and we're not looking at the huge affordability benefits, the health benefits, and really practical things like parking problem, reducing parking problems. So it's those additional benefits that I think we can use to justify these policy reforms. And I think it's better to frame it more generally, to frame the issue not in terms of e-bikes or some new technology and accommodating a particular new variation of micromodes, so the single wheel or cargo bikes or anything like that. I think we need to promote multimodal planning and 15-minute neighborhoods, and then everything else falls into place.
What a great way to finish this webinar, Todd. Thanks very much for bringing us back to the overview. And it's time, but just before we finish here, we would like to extend a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, Todd, Lisa, and Zachary. We would also like to thank our Go by Bike Week sponsors. Hub's Go by Bike Week wrapped up last week. It was great to see the growth in the number of e-bikes participating. And once again, if you'd like more ways to get involved in Hub, you enjoyed today's webinar, you can now join Hub as a lifetime member for just $10, a minimum of $10. The more members we have, the greater our impact when we advocate for better and safer cycling. It's so great to have everybody joining up. You can also check out our many cycling education courses and events that are both online and hopefully in person happening this year. Just visit www.bikehub.ca for more information. And a final reminder that Todd Litman's book, New Mobilities, Smart Planning for Emerging Transportation Technologies, currently available for sale. And the publisher is just having a sale this week, so it's a great time to snag his book. We're at the end of our webinar. Our facilitators will likely be leaving, or our facilitators will be leaving the meeting open just for a few minutes longer. If anybody else wants to leave a comment or whatever in the chat. And thank you again to our panelists. You can leave the meeting if you wish. Participants, thank you for participating. You may also log off now. Look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you, Lisa, for facilitating.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
No problem.
Thank you.